Hello and welcome to Last of the Mohicans, Chapter 1. Summary and analysis by me, Bridget. Now, I happen to know a lot about this book. It's a pretty difficult book to read, and a lot of people are required to read it at some point. So I decided I would just make a garbage Google presentation and a garbage video to share this knowledge with the people who might need it on the internet. I'm sorry in advance about the microphone. I have my own microphone and it's nice, but for some reason it doesn't seem to be working. I don't know. Who cares? Let's get into the chapter. So there's a lot of boring background in it. This Indian runner, quote-unquote, Native American postman, basically, brings this message to General Webb. Uh-oh, it's from Lieutenant Colonel Monroe, and he needs a lot of troops because the enemy general, Montcalm, is on his way to the fort that Lieutenant Colonel Monroe is at. Woo! That's not good. That's scary. So Webb sends a bunch of troops to him. Well, I say a bunch. He sends a couple troops to him. And there's this goofy man who has a monologue about horses, and then this soldier and two ladies and the Indian runner leave, but not on the path with the troops. They leave in a different path towards Lieutenant Colonel Monroe. That's the dumb little summary. Let's talk about the background of the book a little. This is the author, James Fenimore Cooper. He was a rich kid, spoiled, but also traumatized in his youth because a lot of his siblings died. I don't remember how many. I think it was like 6 in his youth. For the late 18th century, I don't know if that was a normal amount or not. I forget. Whatever. Even if it was standard for the time, it's still pretty traumatizing. He attended Yale at 13 years old and got kicked out for a donkey firework prank. So you could say on one hand he's really smart, because he got into Yale at 13, but on the other hand, his education also ended at the age of 13, which means he basically has a middle school education. That's reflected in some of his work. He wrote a lot of books, lived a lot of life, and died just before his 62nd birthday. Not really bad for his time, to live to 62. The book was written from 1823 until it was published in 1826, and this is while Cooper was living in New York City with his family. But it is historical fiction, which means that the story itself takes place in a time before the story was written, and it has real elements and fake elements, and very confusing. But the book is written about a story that happens 69 years beforehand. Very good job, Cooper, with that. The book itself at the time of recording is 193 years old. Pretty old. And that's part of what makes this book so difficult, is it was historical fiction for the time. It is historical fiction forever and ever, but the older it gets, the more people keep reading it and thinking that certain things in it that are fictional elements are actually real elements, and certain things in it that are real elements are fictional elements. Historical fiction is messy in general, but then when you read a historical fiction book that is also a historical book for your time, it gets even messy. Okay, now let's talk about what this book's about. It's a hard thing to talk about when we're only at chapter 1, but we have to get into it anyway. It's about Native Americans a lot. Specifically the last of the Mohicans, and those two words have untrue, unfortunate, and destructive even implications for Native Americans throughout history, but we'll get into that in another chapter. It's about the 7 Years' War, which we call in America and Canada the French-Indian War, because we only really care about the French, Native American, and British conflict, even though it was really a global conflict. This book is a lot about nature, both rivers and trees and mountains, but also the nature of a person and the self, and what is innate for a person. The book is about America, kind of, even though America was not a thing at the time of the stories taking place. But it's about, American identity, and Cooper trying to figure out, as this child of the first generation of Americans. What does it mean to be an American? The book is about the divisions of people into families and tribes and nations and races, and are those divisions helpful or hurtful? Are those divisions innate or arbitrary? What does it mean to be a member of a family or a nation or a tribe or a race? Questions like that. It's about endings, endings of ways of life, of eras, of lives, of families. But it's also about the way that the world moves on from those endings, which is, of course, a beginning of something else. So while there's definitely a focus on endings, there is a subplot, I guess you could say, about beginnings. And the book is about the power of friendship and family, but you're not supposed to know that yet. This is a little image over here that would be recognizable to people about a scene from the French-Indian War. But I guess it's kind of a spoiler to the book, so I blanked out the name. It wouldn't have been a spoiler to the people reading the book at the time of its publishing, but a lot of history has happened in America since then, so we don't really learn about this specific part in school. Let's talk about the war. France and England are fighting to be the colonizers of this specific region of the New World, and Native Americans are fighting for whoever they think is the lesser of two evils, and whoever will allow their tribe to either stay as they are or maintain some kind of power. They're out for their best interest, just like anybody is. Totally normal. And the colonists, British colonists, want Britain to win, but there is that growing discontentment that's going to be fanned in the flames of post-war debt and will inevitably lead to the Revolutionary War. There's lots of conflict at play here. And I was going to do this whole slide talking about Cooper's analysis of Native American alliances and how they really were, but I'd rather just warn you and let you know that everything in the book pretty much is fiction. The tribes that he paints as pro-France and enemies, and the tribes he paints as pro-English and good guys are not accurate. And just like anybody else, all of these tribes are just doing what they do because they're trying to get what's best for their people. The same way any European country does. So, just take everything he says about the nature of these alliances and these tribes with an absolute grain of salt, even less than that. With an atom of sodium, honestly. So here's a quote that's pretty important to the general idea that he's trying to get at here in the beginning. It was in this scene of strife and bloodshed that the incidents we shall attempt to relate occurred, during the 3rd year of the war which England and France last waged for the possession of a country that neither was destined to retain. That's pretty much the gist of it, I mean, neither England nor France ended up being the owners or masters of that piece of land, because although England would win the war, there was a revolution extremely shortly afterward. And, the 7 Years' War in general was a victory for nobody. The colonists didn't really win much. I suppose that they got to stay, but they lost a lot of people and resources, and England and France both went into debt, and obviously the Native American tribes did not get what they wanted. It was a lose-lose situation all around. Lose, 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 if you count every party. But let's talk about the characters of the book for a second here. Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe, real person, real life, kind of fictionalized for the sake of the book, is in control over down here at Fort William Henry. And then we have General Webb, also a real person, and he's in control farther to the south here at Fort Edward. And then Montcalm is the French general, and he and his army are on their way to Fort William Henry. I'm just going to tell you the names of the rest of the characters. Cooper doesn't for this chapter. He will in the second chapter, but I'm going to tell you the names for the sake of convenience. The officer he refers to whom the horse belongs, that Gamut keeps talking about, is Major Duncan Hayward. The two ladies that he talks about are Alice and Cora Monroe. Those are Lieutenant Colonel George Monroe's daughters, and they're here, as you can see, and their father's here. So there's the obvious conflict and reason for leaving Fort Edward. The Indian runner, constantly referred to, that took the message from William Henry to Edward, and that is guiding these people through the forest, that's Magua. And the guy, I guess I already spoiled his name, really, that was talking about the horses and the Bible and blah blah blah, and went on this monologue, that the guy that looks really weird, his name is David Gamet. So here is the problem of this act of the book. General Montcalm is marching towards Fort William Henry, and he has so many troops they don't even know how many troops he has. They say that they're like as numerous as the leaves on the trees or something. The situation, as of right now, is that General Webb is going to send 1,000 troops of iffy quality, only 200 regulars and 800 Massachusetts militia, who are notoriously undertrained, to Lieutenant Colonel Monroe over at Fort William Henry, and that way, when Montcalm arrives, he'll have a better chance against those gazillion troops that he has. Major Duncan Hayward is supposed to bring Lieutenant Colonel Monroe's daughters, Alice and Cora, from Fort Edward over to Lieutenant Colonel Monroe at Fort William Henry. But instead of following the rest of the troops going that direction, they're going to take a secret path through the forest, guided by the Indian runner Magua. It's like an episode of Scooby-Doo. The gang thinks it's a really good idea to split up. And we know how it ends in Scooby-Doo. Here's a little funny moment to note here. I don't know if it's going to end up being important for the viewer, particularly why ever you're reading this book, but Gamet is talking about the horse, blah blah blah, and he says, "This horse really is like the ones described in the Bible, am I right?" And the guy that he turns to for validation is Magua, who just gives him this look of apathy, annoyance, sullenness. It's pretty funny. Just proof that no one really cares about what Gamet has to say. So let's talk about the idea of the chapter. This is a little thing I'm going to do for each chapter to help expand on your understanding of the book. And today we're going to talk about a theme and pseudoscience called physiognomy. It's pretty awful and stupid. It's the idea that you can judge a person's character on the inside based on the way they look on the outside, because the way they look on the outside is somehow telling of their actual character, their nature. For instance, in this book here, in these images, I think this guy's supposed to be loyal because he looks like a dog. This guy's supposed to be friendly because he looks like a cow. He doesn't look really friendly, though. I don't know, I can't read Latin, but you get what I'm getting at. And you also get that there's a little something offensive about physiognomy, the idea that you can judge a person's character based on the way they look on the outside, and if they look a little different, then maybe you can decide that they're different from you, or maybe not as human as you, or has different feelings. Yes, physiognomy, more often than not, is racist. Really, really, really racist. And here's some images that are just pretty disgusting from physiognomy texts to describe what I'm talking about here. I'm not going to go into why they're racist. Hopefully that's obvious to you. Of course, here they're trying to get at the notion of, Semitic peoples and Asian peoples, and here they're trying to suggest that, literally look, like, the less white you look, the less intelligent you're supposed to be. And don't give me the whole thing of like, well, hey, it could be going the other way, saying the white guy is stupid. It's not. Because physiognomy, I'd say even 100% of the time, is trying to suggest that white people are somehow superior just by being white and looking white. Cooper uses a lot of physiognomy. I don't know if he genuinely believes in physiognomy. I think maybe to a degree, but it's a theme that's definitely relevant with his characters and something to keep an eye on, and I'll be pointing it out as we go and as it becomes relevant. But yeah, That's chapter 1. Thank you for listening, and I hope that